So today I'm going to be talking to Dave Swift. Hello, Dave.
Hello there.
How are you? You all right?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. I mean, considering the time of year and the temperature.
Yes. I don't know if you... Well, if you're like me, I can't... Actually, I don't like the cold at all. I get it, but I really find it quite difficult.
So. I mean, I prefer the cooler months. I'm an autumnal guy myself, but so I don't mind it that much. But not when it's kind of, too far the other way. Not when I had to take my 5-year-old son to school this morning in this kind of weather, yes. At sort of 8:30. That wasn't much fun.
Yes, exactly. There are limits.
Because I love him.
Yeah. So, look, traditional first question is, what do you do?
Well, I suppose, generally speaking, I'm a professional musician. I've been a professional musician really pretty much since I left school, which was back in 1980 when I was 16. So, I played a couple of instruments at school, but I actually had no intention of being professional. I just did it for fun. But that was 40 odd years ago. Kind of, and that's all I've ever done. So yeah, a professional working musician.
Cool. Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning, because obviously when people say I left school, it obviously there's a lot of stuff that precedes all of that. The fact that you can actually play an instrument to a level that you could go and do that. So what's your early sort of recollections of being interested in music and what got you sort of fascinated by all of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, my parents weren't musical people. I mean, my mum actually had a very nice singing voice, but I mean, that was about it. But I've got two older brothers who are 8 and 11 years older than me, quite a big age gap, almost generational with me. And they were both avid music fans when I was a kid growing up. And they brought guitars into the house. They both had an acoustic guitar, and then an electric guitar came in. A piano came in the house, but it was only a hobby for them. They weren't professional players, but of course I was hearing their music, through the walls kind of thing. So I was hearing sort of Cream and Jimi Hendrix and Joni Mitchell. So that was all going on in the background. But for me personally, I always had quite a good singing voice. I'm not sure if I have that now. I doubt it very much. But when I was a kid, I had a good singing voice. So I always got picked singing school choirs. And then when I was 10 years old, I joined the local church choir, and I stayed there for 9 years. It wasn't really a religious thing. I just loved singing. I love music. And actually, I'm still very good friends with some of the people I was with in that choir. So, and I started off as a treble, then went to alto, sang bass. So I was singing these beautiful hymns and carols, which I adored. And I really loved that time in that choir. And I guess I didn't realize back then how important that was going to be to me in the future when I actually started to play instruments. But because at that stage, I wasn't playing anything at all. I fooled around on my brother's guitars, but not really very sort of seriously. So it was singing for me. And also in the house, my parents watched a lot of musicals, the great MGM musical with Judy Garland. And I remember the first thing I saw at the cinema was actually called The Sound of Music, with Julie Andrews. That was the first thing I ever saw. So there was always musicals on in the house on TV. So with my brother's records, my brother's strumming guitars, and the musicals on the television, there was music in the air always, So that was quite a big thing, I guess, without realizing how important it was, But and I tried to play my brother's guitars, and I tried to play the piano in the house, but I didn't really bond with any of them, And it wasn't until I went to secondary school that I then decided I want to play a musical instrument. I want to choose my own instrument. So that was quite a big turning point on going to secondary school. So yeah, I mean, if you shall I carry on with that?
Yeah, do, because
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted to.
this is great. This is good.
Yeah, so what happened is I was, so obviously secondary school, I was like 11 or something like that, and I was watching Top of the Pops on TV, and I'd watch the old grey whistle test occasionally, and I'd seen a lot of guys playing the saxophone. I'm thinking, wow, the saxophone, that looks really cool. So I heard that there was a parents-teacher evening at the school where some sixth formers were playing different instruments. You could go with your mum and dad and you could look at all these instruments and pick the one you liked, you know. So I'm thinking saxophone. And I got there and everyone's playing kind of clarinets and flutes and oboes. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't really want to play it. With all due respect to those people who play them. But anyway, there was no saxophone there. So I saw a trombone in a case, and I'm thinking, wow, that looks unusual. I'd not really seen one up close. I put my name forward for that. They only had one. They gave it to another kid. So I ended up with a euphonium, which is like a mini tuba for those people who are not familiar. So I was having lessons with this teacher at the school, a visiting peripatetic teacher, and I was playing this euphonium, and I kind of liked it, but I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this isn't a saxophone, this isn't a trombone, it's a euphonium. And also the music that you play on a euphonium is pretty much restricted to brass bands or an orchestra, whereas I was watching pop bands on the TV and stuff, and I'm thinking, well, this isn't going to fit in terribly well in a pop band. So after 6 months I stopped, and actually music became secondary after that. I carried on singing in the choir, but playing an instrument just disappeared after that, and it wasn't until the other end of school, I was 14, and I wasn't a very good academic student. I literally floundered throughout school. I was a very good athlete. That was my forte. I was very, very good at sports. So come towards the end of my time at school, I was 14, and I really didn't like physics in particular. I couldn't bear the subject. And I discovered that there was a trombone teacher that came along on a Thursday afternoon to teach trombone at the school. And if you volunteered, you get to miss physics. Yes. So I thought to myself, okay, this is, I've got an opportunity here to study the instrument that I actually wanted to back in the day, but they didn't have one, or they gave it to somebody else rather. So I got to miss physics, and I got the opportunity to play the instrument that I'd wanted to. So I went along to this guy. His name was Phil Johnson, and I mention his name because he's still with us, and I reconnected with him 2 years ago. Oh. Cool. I can't believe that. I was so overjoyed to discover him again, And actually, he did an amazing thing. And this is one of those twists of fate. This is one of those sliding door moments. So it is important, I think, for me to mention it. Yes. At 4, and I only discovered this 2 years ago. I didn't know this at the time. But his first thing he said to me was, I can't take you on because you're too old. And I was 14 at the time. And I'm thinking, really? That seems to be a bit sort of unfair, but he did take me on at the time, and he got a trombone out the cupboard. He showed me how to play it, and he said, go away for a couple of weeks and come back and let's see how you got on, And what happened is I was so determined to be good at something other than sport, because I said I was terrible at everything else, So I really put the time and effort into this trombone. So when I came back and played it for him, he went, oh my goodness. I think he expected me to be terrible. And he then could have said, okay, off you go. But because I could play, he took me on as his student. And I studied with him for those last 2 years, and I did some exams, which I passed. And to this day, he says to me, he said, you were the best pupil I ever had. He said, you had that natural ability, you had that enthusiasm, that tenacity. But here's the thing, when I met him a couple of years ago, what I discovered was that the reason why he said you're too old, the school regulations, whatever it was, said that to him as a teacher, don't take on any students past the age of, say, 12, because if they're too old, they've not got enough time left at school to gain the facility on the instrument to warrant giving an instrument to them. They'd rather give an instrument to a kid who's 11 and who's got this whole time ahead of him. So he was only following the protocol of the school. That wasn't his own personal thing. So basically what he did that day is he stuck his neck on the line. He took a chance on me, went against the school regulations and said, okay, I'm going to take you on, I'm going to give you a chance. And so it was him alone is the reason why I'm here. Because if he'd have stuck with the school regs and if he'd have had a bad morning that day, he'd have gone, I'm sorry, you're too old. Sorry, kid, that's that. My whole life could have changed at that precise moment. And it's because of him that I'm sitting here chatting with you now. So Phil Johnson, my old trombone teacher, still with us. Thank you so much. You changed my life.
That's a lovely story. Do you know what I like when I'm doing these podcasts is that these, as you said, a sliding door moment.
Yeah.
You might only get one or two that you spot in your life, right? Sure. But they are so consistent across the board when I talk to different people. They have sort of a moment that you think, well, that was, the other one is this thing of learning a musical instrument in order to avoid a particular subject at school. That is quite common, and actually quite common amongst brass players, apparently. There's, I think, about 2 or 3 that one was trying to avoid. One was trying to avoid French, I believe. Another one was that
I was trying to avoid all of them.
Yeah, and there was another one where there was the lessons were happening in the girls' school, which was next door, so they could go to the girls' school in order to have the lessons, and that's why they started playing. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How you sort of fall into.
Oh yeah, and it's sometimes it's just by accident and serendipity and all sorts of things. And actually, just to finish off that, because at that point I wasn't playing bass at all. I was just playing the trombone and loving it, really, really loving it. And I still play it to this day. I play tuba as well. So I have a strong affinity with brass instruments, because and he taught me how to read music as well at the time. But what happened is then some friends of mine, we were in the school band. And everyone played things like clarinets and whatever, but we wanted to form a band playing something a bit more, updated, like pop stuff or jazz stuff or whatever. So we decided to form our own offshoot from the band, and we hadn't got a bass player. So for whatever reason, I still don't know to this day why, but I volunteered to be the bass player. I'd never played bass before. I didn't know anything about it. So I went with my older brother. We bought a bass guitar from a shop in my hometown of Wolverhampton in the West Midlands. And because I could read music from being a trombonist, the actual reading anything on the bass wasn't that difficult for me. It was just a case of learning where the mechanics of the instrument and where the notes are. So I was playing bass guitar at the school, playing trombone. Now, one day my trombone teacher came in and saw us rehearsing with this band, and he saw me playing bass guitar, and he was really impressed with my ability on it. My trombone teacher was also a fixer in the West Midlands, so he would book musicians for gigs, sessions, shows, whatever. That was a sideline for him. So he was really then keen to book me as a bass player, because at the time, not many bass players could actually read music. Yeah. Lots of bass players, but they were just busking improvisers. So he said to me, I could get you work as a bass player, more so than a trombone player, because, as he said, every band needs a bass player, not every band needs a trombone player. Yeah. But he gave me another great piece of advice, and it was, he said to me, if you take up double bass as well as bass guitar, he said, you will get twice as much work. He said, because there's some instances where people will specifically want a double bass more than a bass guitar, or they'll want you to play both. So that's what I did. I went out and got a double bass, and I taught myself that as well. So I had lessons with him on trombone, but I'm a self-taught bassist. And actually, with the jumping forward massively, when I got the gig with Jools Holland many years later, I got the gig specifically because I played double bass. He was looking for that more than he was a bass guitarist. So again, that little bit of extra advice from my trombone teacher.
That's amazing. I mean, honestly, he is a real catalyst for. I mean, what I liked about that because again, I think really good teachers do this, don't they? It's about opportunity. It's about presenting pupils with opportunities to do things. So it's not like you're actually forcing them to do something.
Sure.
It's just like you're saying, the potential of you being able to get gigs and the fact that you could get paid. I mean, that's a great motivator, isn't it? It's one of the best ways of learning a musical instrument, or certainly learning how to sight read, if you're not a good sight reader, is like, oh, what, I'm getting paid for it. Oh.
Well, that's a good point. I had no idea it was possible to earn a living, because no one in my family did that for a job. My parents worked in factories. My brothers had various sort of jobs at the time, but no one was a professional musician. So I had no yardstick. I had no clue. I mean, that's the other thing I should say as well. When you reach a certain age at school and you have to choose your own subjects. Options, they call them, exactly. I got that completely wrong. I got that devastatingly wrong. And here's why, because although I was into sports, my favorite things were art. I love drawing, painting, and sketching. I love, kind of movies. I'm a big sort of movie fan and plays and stuff. So drama was another thing. Music, of course. I love music. So basically all the arts we're talking about here. And I didn't pick one of them. I didn't. And the reason for it was because I thought to myself, because I'm looking at my parents and my brothers and my friends' parents, and everyone's working in a factory, or they're, did something with their hands. So I thought to myself, okay, I love all of these subjects, music, art, but how are they going to get me a job? So I didn't pick any of them, and I picked things that I was really no good at, and I had no aptitude for, like woodwork, metalwork, technical drawing, and basically that day I blew it, because I should have followed my bliss.
Yes,
I should have picked the subjects that I was passionate about, that I loved, that I had an ability for, and that was a key thing for me. And that's why discovering the instrument, the trombone, at the end of my time at school was my salvation. Because it was a chance for me to sort of grab back what I'd thrown away, because now if I went back, I would change everything. I would pick all of those. I'd pick history. I love history. I just kind of thought I'd pick subjects that were going to help me, put up a shelf or wire a plug. And I still can't do either one of those things.
No. Because obviously, I can remember that at school, with that idea that, doing options that would get you something that you could do a job, right? And even the people that were teaching the arts subjects, I mean, I had an art teacher that was well ahead of his time. And he used to have real problems with the other subjects, because the teachers would turn around and say, well, art's not important, because it won't get you a job, type of thing, which is ludicrous thing to say. Yeah. But people always do that. And he actually said to me once, every teacher thinks their subject is more important than anything else. And he said, in a way, I'm doing this about art. He said, but the point about it is that, there are so many things that art influences, and particularly if you're artistic, but there's so many things that art influences that, if you don't understand anything about it, your life is much the poorer for it.
Yeah.
And that's the point, because and to some extent, this is beginning to it's happening now with kids. We get this idea that, they won't be able to do this because they've got this exam period coming up. And you think, well, life stops, does it? So that because it really, if you haven't really nailed the subject, because this is what gets me, is that it's like, well, revision is something that you do frequently, not just for a month or something, because otherwise it's not really there in your head anyway.
Yes.
It's like saying to a musician, well, you're going to have to practice hard for 4 weeks to catch up with the things you haven't done.
Yeah, exactly. But it really is about, like, you know, being passionate about something. I think, you know, if someone would have said to me, if I'd have had some better guidance on the benefits of choosing the subjects that I loved and that I was passionate about. I mean, for instance, I love horror, science fiction movies. I love comic books. I'm a big Marvel fan. I've still got my original Marvel comics as a kid. So I was reading these comics, and there's all these fantastic drawings of Spider-Man and the Hulk, and I used to copy these drawings. But it's so weird, even though I'm seeing these things. So obviously somebody earned a living from doing those comics, but I didn't put it together as a kid. I didn't kind of think, wow, you can earn a living from that. It just seemed so distant and far removed from my imagination. All I could think about was what I was seeing in front of me, which was, like I said, my parents working in the factories, our neighbors working in the factories, whatever, you know. So I just didn't have that vision, you know. So, and that's the reason why I didn't choose any of the things that I adored. And it was the biggest mistake I think I've ever made in my life, you know. So, and I've been trying to make up for it ever since, you know. That's the reason why I'm still this far on, you know, still very passionate.
Even though you said all that, you know, you sort of fell into this thing of playing a bass, and then doing gigs. So, in spite of all of that, you know, in a way, maybe that's part of why you're doing what you do now, because you made all those choices that you sort of go like, wow, you know, that was terrible. But in actual fact, maybe if you'd done those things, you might not. You know, that might have taken you somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly that. And I didn't go to kind of college or anything like that, because I didn't have any qualifications. I had a couple of trombone exams, but I didn't have any O levels or CSCs and stuff. But again, from not going to college, and there's part of me that kind of thinks, oh, I'd have loved to have done that, especially a music college. But then what happened is, when I left school, I had a couple of jobs immediately when I left school. I worked in the music shop for a while, but pretty much not long after that, I just turned professional, and that's all I've done since I was 17. So maybe, and I made contacts very, very quickly. I met a lot of musicians, and started to gain a reputation in the industry very quickly. And perhaps if I'd have gone to college for 3 years, that would have prevented all of the things that happened naturally.
Yeah, I think so.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. A little while ago, I interviewed a guy called Anthony Holloway, who is an artist, does sculpture and stuff like that, but he's also a cellist.
Okay.
But I met him through a friend, but he was playing like in the Medway towns, which is where I was doing a lot of gigs back in the day, but playing in that sort of punky, psychobilly type, you know, stuff, playing bass.
Okay.
And this guy had obviously had cello lessons right from, you know, when he was like 8 onwards. So he's obviously, you know, pretty good. But his point was, it was expected that he would just go to music college.
Right.
But he thought, I don't really know whether I want to sit in a room practicing for God knows how many hours and then end up playing like somebody else. So it was quite interesting, because he was obviously quite a rebel, right?
Yeah.
In that way of thinking. So again, maybe because you were making those contacts and you were learning on the job, really.
Yeah.
You're learning with people that had that sort of street level awareness of music, which you do when you're working with gigging players, which it may not be the same if you.
And they were always a lot older than me as well. The people I was working with were way older than me, but yeah, it was, as you said, I was right in the thick of it. You know, I was doing what most people were just dreaming of all the time they were doing their studies. And when people ask me now, they ask for my advice about this, about what they should do. You know, in other words, they ask me if they should do what I did, which is obviously not go to further education and just start doing it. And the thing is, it's impossible to answer that, because what worked for me isn't going to work for somebody else, you know.
Yeah.
So I can't say either way, you know, you should go to college or you shouldn't, you know. That has to be down to the individual, you know. All I'm saying is I didn't have the option of going to university because I didn't have the qualification, so I had no choice but just to get out there and start playing. And as you said, when people started to give me money for playing my instruments, I'm thinking, wow, this is fantastic.
Absolutely. Because, you know, so here's an interesting point. When did you realize that this was something you could do? I mean, you sort of more or less sort of said this, but I mean, was there a moment when you sort of went like, crikey? Yeah.
And I'm not sure there was, you know. I don't think there was like a light bulb moment. I think because when I was playing the trombone, I didn't have any big expectations of it. You know, I just kind of thought, you know what, I've really, you know, feel I just love to play an instrument, and then missing the physics was a bonus.
Yes.
Physics.
So physics.
Yeah, I was just doing it for kind of fun, and also, you know, when I took up the trombone, it really had a huge impact on my social life because, you know, there was a local music school that you go to outside of school hours, and there was like all different bands there, like wind band, brass band, orchestra, jazz band, and I was a member of all of these different groups, and you'd swap and change with them, you know. So I was meeting new friends, I was meeting girls, which was great.
Always useful.
You know, and we were going on trips, we were doing concerts and that kind of thing. So actually, this was a whole new life for me that I'd not experienced before. You know, like a great social life as well. So it was, but there wasn't any sort of big sort of moment when I thought, oh my God, I'm doing this. It was just like, it just all happened. It was very sort of natural and progressive kind of thing. And even I remember kind of being quite excited about playing bass because I thought to myself, you know, I am going to be able to, because at the time in the early 80s, there was a lot of great bass players that were coming to the forefront, like Mark King in Level 42 and Sting, stuff like that. So I thought to myself, well, I'm probably going to get to show off a bit more as a bass player than I was as a trombone player, you know. But yeah, it was just a very gradual thing. It just sort of happened, and I just went with it, and I just thought, this is great. I'm playing that music. Thank you for the money. Same time again tomorrow, kind of thing. It was quite a matter of fact, you know. It just all happened. It all happened to me. I wasn't really that active. Like, in fact, I've just done an online interview that I've typed, and someone asked me, you know, this question about getting into the industry. You know, what was there that this big moment? It wasn't. It just came to me, really. You know, I didn't have to make loads of phone calls, whatever. You know, it's just that you do a couple of gigs, people like what you do, and they like you as a person. Yes. And they pass your number on to someone. So it was all word of mouth and reputation.
Yes.
So I never had to really kind of bust a gut to get work.
You said something really interesting there, Dave.
Thank goodness.
Well, no, you did. I was just going to pick something up because it's something that I think people, if they're listening to that, could miss. And as you said, if they liked you playing and they like you, right? And I think that is something that's really important because, again, you know, I was talking to people about the college things where they do the thing about networking.
Oh yes.
And of course, networking, you get this idea, you know, it's like a business that you go out with your business kind of. Well, no, actually, it's a case of, do people like you? You know, are you likable?
Yeah.
And networking happens that way, doesn't it? Because if you're easy to get on with.
Sure. Well, quite often, you know, you spend more time with your fellow musicians traveling to gigs or in the band room or in the rehearsal room than you do actually performing on stage. You know, that's a key thing. And I know lots of great musicians. Well, not a lot. I know some great musicians who don't always get called because their personalities are not always the most desirable of personalities to have around.
Yes, no, I get that totally. But again, if you're building a band, it's exactly the same thing. It's all about chemistry, isn't it?
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes the worst thing you can do is have the best guitarist, you know, because they might not, you know, they just might not gel with everybody else. You know what I mean? It is.
Egos are a big thing, aren't they? You know, I mean, egos come into play, and just, you know, personal experiences, or you know, maybe if someone's got an unfortunate addiction to one thing or another, you know, these can all be big problems, you know. So yeah, absolutely, you know, being sort of personable and being easy to get along with are pretty crucial in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the sort of the trajectory, if you sort of mean? So you're doing a lot of gigs, you're playing for lots of different people, I'm assuming, or are you playing for
the early gigs were very much things like theatre work. I used to work, you know, in the pits, the orchestra pits of shows and stuff, and you know, just gigs, but very low key things, pubs, hotels, whatever. And then I started to get called to join a few more bands that were going on cruise ships. So in the mid 80s, I did about the mid to late 80s. I did about 4 cruise ships. The first one was the QE2 in 1984, and I'd never been to New York before. So I joined the QE2 for 10 weeks as a bass player in one of the bands, and we sailed backwards and forwards. And coming into New York was still one of the greatest moments of my life, because I loved America. I'd never been. I'd always wanted to go. So yes, sailing into New York City Harbor was great. I'm thinking, wow, this is all because I can play an instrument, you know. And then and on the other ships, we were traveling all over the world, the Caribbean, you know, Alaska, Japan, wherever, you know. And this was incredible for me, because I just thought I wouldn't ever get to experience these countries, the culture, the food. All of this has come about because of me. I just thought, oh, playing an instrument, that'd be a bit of fun. And here I am, traveling all around the world, you know. So I did that throughout the 80s, and I was still doing, you know, I was doing some sessions, but it was all low key stuff. It wasn't with anyone particularly hugely famous or anything like that. I was just a working, jobbing player. But then at the end of the 80s, I realized there was a lot of gaps in my education musically, because I'd never studied music as an academic subject. I'd learned music through the instruments themselves. I hadn't studied it academically. And I really wanted to do that. Initially, I was thinking of going to Berkeley in America to study at the college there, specifically to do jazz studies. And at the time, it was just too expensive to go there, couldn't afford it. So the next best thing I thought was to move to London. And then maybe, and this was before all of these colleges and courses are available now, but I thought, well, get to London, try and just find somewhere to live, rent a room, but then find the players that are really busy, like the bass players who have got all the gigs, all the sessions that are in demand, you know. So I thought, go and have some private lessons with these guys. And I also studied specifically harmony, music harmony with one guy as well, you know. But what I didn't realize the benefit of this was, and this is something I tell my pupils now and younger players, because they say, how do we get gigs? How do we get work? How do we become like you? And what I say to them is, I advise them, go and study with players. Find the players who are the busy guys, the in-demand guys, right? Assuming they teach, have some lessons with them, but think of it as less of a lesson. You might not even want a lesson at all. I think of it as an audition. Yeah. So you're giving them money. So first of all, you've got that teacher's undivided attention. Yeah. You know, you can't do, because if you just go up to a player at the end of a gig and say, "Oh, have you got any work, mate?" It might not end well. You know, because the person doesn't know you from Adam. They've just finished a gig. They probably want to hang out with their friends, have a drink. And you come up, a complete stranger, saying, "Oh, have you got any work?" It's not the way to do it. But if you find a player that you admire and you like, pay him for his time. And then he's going to get to see you play. He's going to get to hear what you can do, your ability. But also he's going to get to know your personality, because you're going to be with that person for an hour. So they're going to get to. So this is what I just did it because I wanted the lesson. I didn't have an ulterior motive. But what was the added bonus for me was that these people, when they could see my ability, they would then book me for gigs and sessions that they couldn't do.
Yeah.
But obviously, they could only do that once they'd heard me play and knew what my personality was like. So this was unexpected for me, because all I wanted was a lesson. I wanted some knowledge from them.
Yeah.
But now I realise that that's a great networking thing in itself.
Yeah.
So that's what happened when I first moved to London, and specifically as well, I deliberately didn't want to do the work that I'd already done. So in other words, I'd done a lot of theatre work. And when I came to London, I knew that I could go into the West End and play all those shows. But I love musicals. I genuinely do. But I just thought, why go from my hometown where I did lots of shows and come to London to do lots of shows?
Exactly,
That's not what this is about. I wanted to come to London to grow as a musician, to evolve as a musician, to learn, to study, and to do more creative things. And specifically, I wanted to play jazz. I wanted to be a jazz musician playing with other creative, improvising musicians. So I deliberately avoided certain things. And that is probably to my detriment, because I was turning down work that I knew I could do. There was just certain things I knew that I could sight read this stuff and it'd be fine. But I just thought, if I start doing those kind of gigs again, I'm potentially going to be associated with that, and I'm never going to escape. What was the point of coming down here? So I stuck to my guns. I suffered for my art, and believe you me, I did suffer, because I've never been so poor in my professional life when I decided to try and be a jazz musician.
I was going to say that it goes with the territory.
Yeah, exactly, because jazz gigs are notoriously sparse and they're not terribly well paid either. But my soul was so enriched playing this wonderful improvised music with these like-minded players. And it was then that I ended up working with a saxophone player who had already got the gig with Jools Holland. Now, this was like 1991. So this was, Jools Holland wasn't the Jools that we now know. He wasn't as high profile. He wasn't as famous. He'd just left Squeeze, the pop band that he was in at the time. So he was just starting out as a solo artist. So then the next thing I hear, like I said, this saxophone player says, okay, Jools is looking for another bass player. Do you fancy giving it a go?
Right.
So that's when things really changed.
Yeah. That's amazing. Because just as a point, who was the bass player that he was familiar with before you turned up?
Well, he actually used a couple of players. One was the bass player that was the bass player in Squeeze at the time when he was in there. But the main guy he was using was a guy called Pino Palladino.
Yes, that's right.
Who to any bass player, he is a god.
Yes, I know. This is what I was going to say. So not only were you going for the gig, that's quite a brave move, isn't it? Because
they're big shoes to fill. Although I think I'll probably take larger shoes than him. He's a bit taller than me, but I think my feet are probably bigger for what it's worth. But it was so. Absolutely. When I knew Jools from being in Squeeze, and I was quite a Squeeze fan. I had some of their records. And also I remember Jools from presenting The Tube with Paul Eads, an earlier live music TV show. But I had no idea what he'd done after that. He'd gone off the radar for me. So when my friend said, look, he's looking for a bass player, Pino Palladino has been doing this. But then Jools had specifically said he wanted someone who played double bass.
Right.
It didn't hurt that I played bass guitar as well, but he wanted someone who played double bass, and Pino didn't. And Pino was off on that major trajectory that's turned him into a bass god that we all know. So anyway, I went along to an audition at Jools' studio, which still to this day is about a 5-minute drive from where I live here in southeast London. And I went to Jools' studio with my double bass, and Jools was there, and our guitarist was there, or the guitarist, he's still the same guy. And I had no great aspirations, expectations. I was very matter of fact about the whole thing, because I was kind of happy already being who I was and doing what I was doing. Yeah. And like I said, bearing in mind, this was 91. So later with Jools Holland didn't exist. his Radio 2 show didn't exist. Jools Holland's New Year's Eve Hootenanny show didn't exist. There was none of this, you know. So to me, there was less at stake. There was, you know, I didn't have to like, you know, go crazy and sort of try and impress him or anything like that. And I think this actually worked in my benefit. So we just played for about an hour at Jools' studio. We just jammed for an hour or so, and it was fun. It was great. You know, I really enjoyed it. And at the end of it, Jools said to me, he said, "Oh, that's really great, but we do have some other people that we need to see." And I remember thinking, well, that sounds like a brush off.
Yeah.
To me, you know, it's that archetypal, you know, yeah, we've got more people to see kind of thing. So I said, yeah, that's absolutely fine. So I started to put my double bass back in its case, and Jools went outside with the guitar player. A few minutes later, they came back, and Jools went, "Oh, you know, what the hell? The gig's yours," you know. And he gave me a carrier bag that was bulging full of cassette tapes of live gigs where Pino had been playing bass on there. And he just handed me this carrier bag and said, "Have a listen to these tapes, play along with them, get to know some of the songs. And we've got some gigs coming up. So we'll give you a call when the rehearsals are." And that was it. I got the gig on the spot. But to this day, I'm the only person that had to audition for the Jools gig. So anybody else that's in the band or has ever been in the band has never had to audition. And the reason is that for Jools, the bass is the most important thing to him. And so loads of other guys have got the gig via recommendations, and literally they've just turned up on a gig and Jools said, "Well, let's see what you can do." And that's it, they're in the band. But with me, he had to make sure he was making the right choice. So I had to do that audition. He needed to play with me for that hour to see I was the right guy for the job. So that was 1991. And yeah, I've still got the list of gigs that we did. And there were very low-key things like summer balls, a couple of university gigs, nothing at all prestigious or anything like that, really. And I thought to myself, yeah, this is fine. I was still doing my jazz gigs. And I thought this is probably going to be for a few months, you know, and then it'll fizzle out. And then, of course, in 1992, he got the BBC TV series later with Jools Holland. In 93, he got the Hootenanny show. Yeah. And everything changed. Yeah. You know, all of our lives changed because we weren't just a band playing in college balls and universities. We were on TV playing with iconic and legendary artists, you know, and none of us saw that coming. I don't think even expected. So all our lives changed at that moment.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Because again, you know, this goes along with what you've said before, that really you're doing things and things are falling into place without, maybe in retrospect, you might look at something and go, "Oh yeah, you might be able to see something, but not at the time."
Well, it reminds me of one of my favorite sayings, and there's variations on this, and I'm not quite sure who came up with it first, but I've always liked it. And like I said, there's a couple of variations, but the basic one is the harder you work, the luckier you get.
You get, yes. Yes.
Some people say the harder you practice, the luckier you get, but
practice, the harder you
if you're just in your house doing that, no one's going to see or hear you. But yeah, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I've always liked that because that's what I've always done. I've always had a very strong work ethic. You know, in the early days, I never turned anything down. I took anything and everything on, made sure I was seen and heard. I mean, not when I said made sure, it wasn't a deliberate thing. I was just doing the work, you know. But by doing the work and having that strong work ethic, you do get seen and you do get heard and you do get recommended. Yeah. It's just the way it is, you know. It's like
totally. I mean, as you said, there are lots of variations on that.
Yeah.
There's a Picasso thing about inspiration. You know, for inspiration to arrive, she needs to find you busy. You know, it's that type of thing.
Yeah. That's right.
You've got to put the work in, and you just got to keep doing the thing. Yeah. That's great. There's so much in that. You know, this sort of thing of the sort of the unplanned, but not the unprepared.
Sure.
You know, because from what you said, you've always been prepared. You know, you've got the skills. You know, particularly with the big sight read and having, and I would say actually singing.
Mm-hmm.
That thing about singing, because you know, obviously I'm you know, I dabble around with bass, but I'm not a bass player. But as a guitar player, one of those skills that you have to have is you've got to be able to hear a melody.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't matter if you're playing classical guitar or electric guitar or something. I mean, you still got to be able to hear that melody. If you can sing that melody, you naturally put the sort of dynamics into a melody that makes it sort of live. You know, it's not about notes. It's about the language.
And that's a good point that you just reminded me of, because what I noticed was when I became a musician, like I said, a trombone player, and in the early days of me being a bass player, I was an excellent sight reader. I could read anything you put in front of me. I didn't have a problem with that. But in the early days, if you took that music away and you asked me to play anything I just played, I couldn't do it. So in other words, my ear wasn't developed. You know, it was like music had become a visual thing. You know, I could read these fantastic sort of things, but if someone said, okay, let's just improvise, let's just jam, in the early days, I hadn't got a clue, because I hadn't developed my ears at all. I was only good at reading and stuff. So, and that's why when I got the Jools gig, that was a big change for me, because there's actually only myself and the horn players in that band that can read music. The rest of the rhythm section are not readers. I
was going to ask you that, because I've interviewed Derek Nash, and I've you know, over the years I've seen Derek playing in different things, and obviously he's a terrific reader. But of course, in a band where you've got a lot of contemporary players, particularly guitarists, I mean, you know, guitarists find, I'm speaking from my own experience, I read, but I'm not a great sight reader. I can read, I can play classical guitar and everything, but having that thing of just having somebody slap a piece of paper in front of you, and because the guitar is a bit of a tricky beast anyway when it comes to read. But that's an interesting mix of things where you've got the horn players and it's there, right? And as you're read. Do you score the parts for yourself, or?
Yeah, I always do that. I'm very fastidious with it. So if we get some music for anyone that we're playing with, and I've literally got thousands of transcriptions from the last 32 years. So if we get a recording, the first thing I do, and this is assuming that there's time to do it.
Yes.
Time for me to do it, I will meticulously transcribe the original bass line of the record. So I've got it on a chart. Now, I do this, one, because I enjoy the process, because it's very good ear training as well. It keeps my writing in check. But it just means I get to see every little minute detail that the original bassist did. So when we play with someone on Jools' TV show, a lot of the time they want what's on the record. They don't want an approximation. They don't want you messing about with it. They want exactly what's on there. So then I've got it. I'm at that studio. And if there's time to learn it off by heart, I will do that. There isn't often the time. So sometimes on TV, I am actually reading the chart. But then occasionally they'll say to me, oh, listen, you don't have to play what's on the record. You can just free it up a little bit. And that's fine, because I've already done the hard work.
Yeah.
But if I turned up with that attitude where I'm thinking, oh, yeah, he just goes a little bit like this, and then they say, no, we want what's on the record, then I'm done for. I haven't done the homework. I haven't done that. So I always do the hard work first, and then either play that exactly or... And it is funny, actually, because when I used to do transcriptions when I was younger at home, and my parents are no longer with us, but my mum used to sort of watch me do this, and she could see the complexity of these written parts. And she jokingly said to me one day, she said, my goodness, if you'd have worked that hard at your subjects at school, you know, you'd have been like a genius, you know. And I thought to myself, well, and actually one of the reasons why I am so fastidious now with this kind of thing, it's like I'm making up for lost time. You know, it's like I want to be really good at learning this stuff and working it all out. And it's almost like it's like some kind of self-flagellation, you know, for being a bad academic student. I'm kind of making it up now with how diligent I am with this kind of work, you know. But you know, with the Jools thing, it is an interesting thing, because the band, not only it's not just as easy as readers and non-readers with Jools' band, because we're all from very different backgrounds. So, you know, Mark, our guitarist, he's probably more of like a blues roots player. You know, Jools specifically, he's like a boogie woogie pianist, you know. Whereas Gilson would probably describe himself as a rock pop drummer. You know, some of us were definitely what you would call session musicians. You know, so actually, it's a real kind of patchwork of different musical abilities, different backgrounds, but that's the wonderful thing about music and the great leveler that it is, because it brings us all together, and somehow we all get through it, and we all end up playing the same piece of music with the same artist, and it all sounds good. But it's interesting how it does come together, actually, because in some ways on paper it shouldn't.
No, I know, but that's the thing, isn't it, about music and art, but particularly music, is on some sort of level, it actually doesn't make sense. I mean, we try to make sense of it, but, you know, there's a lot of things that go on, and you think, well, you couldn't. It's almost like by accident these things work. You know, you can sort of go, because you couldn't plan that, could you, really?
Sure.
You couldn't plan, oh, we'll have this person there because we're missing this little bit. It's not like that.
Well, that's what I love about playing jazz, which I didn't do really before I moved to London. That was why I moved. And my wife, Lucy, she's a professional jazz singer. And we perform together a lot. And we do jazz standards, you know, and we often work with a piano player, drummer, and a horn player, but I'm usually playing double bass. And the thing is, we've got a basic idea of the songs we want to do, but there's no arrangements for it. There's no parts, there's no charts. It's just that there is like a certain repertoire that if you're a jazz musician that you need to have in your head. And sometimes we're playing with musicians that we don't know or we've never met before, you know. But as long as you can agree that which tunes do you know, and you pick so many tunes, but then once you start playing, you've absolutely no idea what's going to happen within that framework. You know, how someone's going to interpret the chords, how someone is going to improvise, you know, and that's why I love playing that kind of music, you know. And it seems ironic, from before moving to London, I'd always have to be over prepared for stuff and have charts and chord things written out, you know, whereas with jazz gigs, you just turn up with your instruments, you agree on certain songs, and you just go for it. It's like tightrope walking, and I love that. I really love that. You know? I wish I'd have done it sooner when I was much younger. But
well, that was brilliant, mate. That was brilliant. So interesting, and I mean, there's so many points there, which I mean, for anybody interested in music or whatever, would find fascinating. I mean, you know. As well, and as I said to you, there's again lots of points that seem to be like recurring things that come up, you know, with different people, and you know, that way that you know, your sort of career can sort of weave in a particular way, and you know, it's great, it's brilliant. So
I mean, just really quick, I still love doing what I do, and in fact, in recent years during lockdown, I took up guitar, which I'd never really played before, and I'd always wanted to. So since 2020, I've actually been practicing loads of guitar, and same with tuba. Although I was a trombone player, I really wanted to play tuba, so I've got one of those now, and so I practice that at home. So also, apart from just the fun I get, the enjoyment, it improves your skill set.
Yes.
Technically.
Yes.
Hopefully soon I'll be able to do some gigs on guitar, do some gigs on tuba. So it's you know, I'm kind of the eternal student. I love learning and evolving and growing all the time. It's very, very important for me.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Well, thanks ever so much. It's really good. And I'll put some things in the show notes. So you know, if you send me some links and stuff, I can do that. That'd be good. Great. But that was a real pleasure. Right.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
So hopefully speak to you soon.
Indeed. Cheers.